Okay, so my team has signaled that we are already live streaming on our YouTube channel. Good evening, all. It's great to have you all back with us today. And just hold on. Yes, and this is fantastic. All the three sessions, very important takeaways. We had very distinguished, highly distinguished, eminent guests joining us and guiding us on different aspects yesterday, and we are equally excited about today. So with this, I hand over to my friend Mayank Singh, we all know is a senior defense journalist, and he's also the vice president, honorary, obviously vice president of the Indian Futures. So over to you, Mayank, to take this kickstart this session.
Thank you so much, Manish. And the way since yesterday, there had been lineup of erudite minds actually, and the way the nuts and bolts of entire diplomacy and all the aspects of grand strategy, when we call it grand strategy, the larger perspective of the country is being discussed. And here we come to a session which is very important because we are having two erudite minds, people who had been practicing the very important aspect military of it in terms of India's strategy. Not only practicing, they had been planning and training the people who come down to the ground, and then they practically execute those things. We have got the very Vice Chief of the Indian Navy, Vice Admiral S.N. Ghormade, sir, and the person who was on ground training the cadets. He was Commandant Indian Naval Academy. He was the person who commanded the fleet, Eastern Fleet, and the person who had been part of the arm which is called the subsurface naval arm.
No, Mayank, a little confusion.
That
you may be talking about Vice Admiral Bokre.
Oh, successor. Yes, sir, right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, and the person who will be talking about the nuts and bolts of the strategy, military aspect of grand strategy. How grand is the grand strategy? The words of strategy and all, they might confuse the people, but here the people who are listening are the academics, the scholars, the students, and also the general public. In that case, a person who can be as better as General Admiral here, Ghormade, sir. Sir, we would like to hear from you. The session is about leveraging the Indian military, the military aspects, military power. So we would like to hear you from your mouth, your experiences, and the way you see all these.
Thank you, Mayank. Yeah, and at the outset, I would like to thank you, and of course, thank Dr. Manish, founder of the Indian Futures, for inviting me to be part of this distinguished Indraprastha Grand Strategy Conference. Simplistically, our unstated grand strategy undoubtedly is the well-being and economic prosperity of our citizens and the nation. And I think that was discussed yesterday in a large measure. Leveraging military power is one of the very important traits of the apex leadership and dimension of statecraft. There is no doubt that military power is to be judiciously leveraged to achieve our perceived grand strategy. You're also well aware that military power is leveraged not only for military crisis, but for various other contingencies, such as HADR efforts, evacuation of Indian diaspora, for example, and assistance required to civilian authorities. It is important that we see leveraging of military power in the context of current geopolitical landscape. Across the world, new conflicts have emerged, and there is constant tension between bigger powers and emerging powers. There are smaller hardline nations that take advantage of all this to be more defiant. Therefore, for the foreseeable future, we are likely to see a multipolar fragmented but interconnected world where nations are cooperating, competing, confronting, and if required, conflicting with each other in economic, political, and diplomatic sphere. Every nation would want to enhance its comprehensive national power and create strategic space for itself. There is no doubt on the fact that good understanding of the military and the domain it operates, whether it is land, sea, and air, are required to correctly utilize the military across the spectrum of crisis management. This also enables identify an apt military strategy that is most appropriate for any evolving situation and could be favorably utilized for achieving our perceived grand strategy and contribute towards comprehensive national power. I'll take this opportunity to highlight the importance of maritime domain and leveraging maritime power to this august audience. There is now greater understanding of maritime domain and the importance of sea in the discussion of India's ascension to its rightful place in the Committee of Nations. This was amply evident in August this year when Prime Minister Narendra Modi chaired a United Nations Security Council debate on maritime security. However, there is a requirement to further instill maritime identity and pride in the Indian populace so that they have a better understanding of the maritime domain. Sea power is a facilitator of economic power and contributes towards comprehensive national power. And the quest for the same is in turn a motivator for the development of sea power. In this context, let me first highlight the 70, 80, 90, 100 rule. 70% of the globe is covered by the sea. 80% of the global population resides within 200 kilometers of the coast. 90% of the global trade at some point passes over the seas. And almost 100% of the global information traffic transits through the undersea cables. Given 90% of the global trade traverses through the maritime domain, smooth conduct of oceanic trade is fundamental for functioning of the global economy. Further, in this information age, importance of the information cannot be overemphasized. Recent technological developments are making deep sea mining economically feasible and permits us to harness polymetallic nodules to mine rare earths. The vision for India in 2030, as initiated in Feb 2009 by Government of India, outlines blue economy as one of the 10 core dimensions of economic growth. Blue economy at present contributes 4% of our GDP, and there is much more the nation can do in this domain. Oceans also provide alternate sources of energy, wind, wave energy, which is pitted to be the leading power generation technology of the future. In addition, Indian Ocean region itself contains more than 65% of world's known hydrocarbon reserves. India's dominant and strategic geographical position in the middle of the Indian Ocean amidst important trade routes, a vast coastline of 11,085 kilometers and island territories of 1,382 islands bestow upon her the status of a maritime nation with rich marine resources to influence events in the entire Indian Ocean. Our maritime zones comprise 2,013 million square kilometers of sea, which is the 12th largest in the world. Goes without saying that a safe and secure maritime environment is prerequisite to nurture our strategic interests. Protection of our long coastline, exclusive economic zone, and island territories containing living and non-living resources must be primary area of interest for India. Whilst countering traditional maritime security threats would remain the main focus of a maritime force, emerging non-traditional security threats have necessitated development of a fresh paradigm for maritime security. I will highlight few drivers that could lead to the maritime conflict in the region. Resources are likely to be a primary driver for contesting maritime claims that could lead to conflict. Pressures of population, regional interference, ethnic strife, scarce natural resources, border disputes, and weak littoral governments are likely to contribute to instability in the region. On the seabed, transoceanic cables, underwater domain awareness sensors, and undersea resources are gaining huge significance and reasons for competition. Indian Ocean region has become more vulnerable to new unconventional threats, ranging from piracy, gun running, drug trafficking, illegal immigration, pollution, port security, smuggling, international terrorism, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Pandemics, climate change, global supply chain disruptions, cyber threats, economic and financial coercion, etc., all endanger the global balance and create instability in the maritime domain. This region is also witnessing great power rivalry, and the situation has been complicated with China having been provided basing facilities at Djibouti, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. Non-adherence to rule-based international orders and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, maritime militia, quest for hydrocarbons, and competing EEZ claims have a risk of manifesting into flashpoints and cause instability. Now, I would like to highlight certain national military strategies that can be employed for leveraging military power. Most important leverage a nation can accrue from a strong armed force is peace and stability. Peace ensures all-round growth and development of a nation. The time-tested strategy of deterrence that a strong armed force provides is a foundational strategy which is through prevention of conflict, through coercion by military capability, its posture and actions. Strong armed forces also facilitate military diplomacy, absence of which may adversely affect national security and give rise to conflict. Cross-border interaction between the military must be effective enough to ensure lasting peace, security, and stability in the region. Under neighborhood first policy, our armed forces are constantly leveraging and influencing our immediate neighborhood to prevent instability. Collaboration with like-minded and friendly nations and military cooperation enhances military influence of a country and thus helps in posturing and thereby ensures security and stability. Capacity and capability building in terms of supply of military items, logistics, training, technological assistance, financial aid to our neighbors, and also to the adversary of our adversary can be leveraged for strategic gains. Appropriate use of strategic communication by the military by means of using of combination of words and action can also effectively be utilized for influencing decision making. Against this backdrop, let me also highlight how the maritime power could be leveraged and demonstrated in current geopolitical landscape. I'll talk about the hard power of maritime power first. The third leg of strategic triad and the second strike capability is a major strategic capability that provides deterrence and accrues peace and stability as dividends. Strong and potent naval forces bring a range of capabilities required for credible deterrence. The Navy could exercise sea control in our primary area of interest and concurrently other blue water operations depending on the emerging threats. The nation needs to utilize all the domains of warfare. Continuous and peaceful use of seas is essential for the nation to achieve its grand strategy. The underwater domain remains the most challenging domain where there is vast scope of research and utilization of marine resources. Research in the underwater domain by our nation needs further impetus, and safety and security of this domain can be provided by the Navy. As mentioned earlier, the third leg of strategic triad remains a great strategic capability for the nation. Protecting our sea lines of communication for carriage of national trade and cargo ensures unhindered economic progress of the nation, whilst the introduction of enemy sea lines of communication allows applying strategic leverage, including psychological pressure, by disrupting his freedom to use seas for military purposes. India's growing maritime interest underscores the central importance of power projection from the seas to safeguard interests and counter threats before they can bear upon India. Power projection by the Navy conveys the commitment and intent at the national, political, diplomatic, and military level. Naval forces can be effectively utilized for political signaling and posturing. The increase in freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea by the US Navy and its allies is an apt example of this. A naval ship works as an ambassador of peace, and the transition from peacetime to a wartime role is quick and can be leveraged by the nation. Use of space-based surveillance and cyber domain to increase maritime domain awareness has a significant impact on the utilization of maritime power in the future. China's enhanced capabilities in the domains of space and cyber will increase its battle space transparency and provide information dominance. Having spoken at length about the military role of the Indian Navy, it is time to shift to its benign role and soft power aspect of maritime power. Since Navy operates and demonstrates its capability beyond the horizon, I'll now give a few examples which are recent ones. We recently conducted Operation Samudra Setu as part of the national effort to provide medical succor to the nations in the Indian Ocean region and also repatriate Indian citizens from these countries using the naval ships during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. During the operation, in the first phase of the pandemic, which lasted over 58 days, it involved ships that traversed over 23,000 kilometers by sea and evacuated 3,992 Indian nationals from Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Iran. In end April this year, when the second wave of COVID-19 put tremendous pressure on countries' health infrastructure, the Indian Navy launched Op Samudra Setu 2 to augment national mission for meeting oxygen requirements. 10 Indian Navy warships were deployed for the shipment of liquid medical oxygen, which transported almost 1,150 metric tons. Oxygen cylinders and infilled cylinders, concentrators, PPEs, ventilators, etc. from friendly foreign countries were brought in across the expanse of the Indian Ocean region, and they were transshipped to India. This Operation Samudra Setu was a resounding success and showcased the nation's sea lift capability. Another such operation undertaken by the Navy is the Mission Saga, which is aligned to the Prime Minister's vision of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, and reiterated India's position as a preferred security partner in the Indian Ocean region, with Indian Navy as the first responder in the maritime domain. This mission also highlighted the importance accorded by India to relations with our maritime neighbors to further strengthen its existing bonds. Our operational activities are underpinned by a steadfast focus on capability accretion, which remains anchored in Atmanirbharta and Make in India. Platforms across the spectrum, from aircraft carrier to submarines, stealth destroyers, frigates, and corvettes, are all being constructed in our country, which is a matter of great pride. More than 130 warships have already been built in Indian shipyards. At present, 37 out of 39 warships and submarines presently under construction are being built at Indian shipyards, which includes the first indigenous aircraft carrier, which is currently undergoing sea trials. Such investments have significant downstream benefits for the defense ecosystem, especially the shipyards and the associated ancillary industries, where thousands of MSMEs are involved with shipbuilding projects. In this regard, it may be interesting to note that statistics show the multiplier effect of one worker employed in shipyard is approximately 6.4 on ancillary industries. In simpler terms, it would mean that for every job created for construction of a naval ship, approximately 6.4 new jobs are created in the ancillary industry. This unyielding emphasis on indigenization and self-reliance plows back a significant portion of the Navy's budget into the Indian economy and accrues numerous downstream benefits like employment generation and upskilling the workforce. Our investment in defense and aero sector would also result in development of dual-use technologies for nation building. Naval investment, especially in shipbuilding, has resulted in indigenous development of vast spectrum of technologies and products, starting from fundamental pumps to high-end complex weapon systems. More than 100 developmental projects of naval technologies are in progress with our research and development organizations. Today, the seas around us present a complex security environment. Indeed, our first aim is to strengthen ourselves. A strong navy and maritime power is always respected. India's maritime capability and power, which includes naval force levels, merchant marine, shipbuilding capability, fishing fleet, non-living resources, safe harbors, and other maritime services, have to be developed to a level commensurate with our aspirations. The underlying fact remains that operational capability of the armed forces is of utmost importance and cannot be compromised at any cost. We need to have a strong military so that its power is leveraged to serve our national interest and to achieve our grand strategy. In the end, I would like to again thank the organizers of this conference for giving me this honor and opportunity to interact with such an esteemed audience. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, sir. And you have simplified everything actually, right from east to west. And there are a few aspects about the Navy that, in terms of Make in India, what we see today, Navy saw it in 1965 and started with Department of Naval Design. And as I was talking, that lots of indigenization is taking place, whether it's move, float, or even fight elements. As far as complexities of maritime aspects are concerned, sir even spoke about South China Sea. And being the Deputy Chief of IDS, Integrated Defense Staff, sir had seen that all operational planning and things, aspects which might turn up the future in a brighter way. Thank you so much, sir. I'm sure the students who might have heard might have unwinded lots of knots on grand strategy and strategy, sir. The next officer who is with us has a deeper peep into the aspects of information, into the aspects of national strategic planning, advisor to the National Security Council Secretariat, headed the Department of Defense Intelligence Agency, a Garhwal Regiment officer, General Khandare, Vinod Khandare. Sir, welcome to the seminar which is going on since yesterday, sir.
Thank you, Mayank. Thank you so much.
You have been parts of lots of operations. You have seen lots of planning, sir, and lots of aspects of military. And herein we are talking about grand strategy, sir. Sir, we would like to hear your mind on deeper aspects of it, on planning aspect, and also the way the military which we talk about, which is the important part of grand strategy, has been used recently, operationally, in terms of sending the longer message, higher message, and deeper message.
Sir, before Lieutenant General Khandare begins, sir, I really want to thank you for really stepping in. Actually, the other two speakers, Shri Arjun Subramaniam and Professor Harshpant, have at the last minute, obviously due to some emergency at home, one health emergency and one Air Vice Marshal having fever is unwell. So both of them couldn't join and expressed deep regrets for not making it. And at the last minute, we requested Lieutenant General Khandare, was extremely kind enough to agree. In fact, he will be speaking in the next session, but he really readily agreed also to guide us in this session, really talking about, as Mayank pointed out, holding very senior positions of authority in the Indian Army. So we look forward to your guidance and to your take on how India has been leveraging its military power. Especially, he has been very instrumental, especially in the last couple of years, and I think his deep insights are really going to make this session very enriching. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayank. Thank you, Manish. And Jai Hind to the entire audience who's listening to us, seeing us. And before I start, I want to very humbly dedicate this talk of mine to General Rawat, Mrs. Rawat, and all the warriors who left us just a couple of days back. And what Manish said, I want to bring out that in a soldier's or a sailor's or an airman's life, contingencies are more important than the main plan. So when you asked me to step in, that was a part of a normal routine or an attitude that such things do happen. You know, there is a saying in the army that when the first bullet is fired, the main plan goes out of the window. So it is thereafter the leadership qualities and the attitude and the teamwork which carries you through. So I'm sure your team is a fantastic team, and such contingencies will be easily overcome. My thanks to all of you for inviting me to the Indraprastha Grand Strategy Conference. And I want to compliment Vice Admiral Ghormade for having covered the overall issues very well and the maritime in particular. I'll try and not repeat anything that he has said so that our listeners, our audience can gain more advantage. And I do not want to restrict myself to only particular incidents, but I want to look at the international canvas and derive lessons from there, and even our historical strength, where we have a civilizational connect to the grand strategy, which unfortunately, because of the Macaulay system of education, we have been generally forgetting, and we are more attracted towards what the West says. I think it's time that we look at what our rich heritage and culture taught us. And there's nothing which is a taboo that if we look at our history, we will not be contemporary. It is not so. These are common sense solutions. And my entire approach is going to be from a common sense approach so that it's easy for the students to understand. Now, firstly, you can leverage military power only if you understand what is military power. If you do not understand military power, then how can anyone expect the apex leadership to leverage a strength? Uh, the apex leadership is to be molded and brought to a level where they understand what is a strength, what is a vulnerability. And if a strong military presence, which is fully aligned and contributes towards the comprehensive national power, is available to you, it is not required on a daily basis, but it's required in an emergency. And if you do not pay attention to that, your military power deteriorates. And then thereafter, there's no question of leveraging the power that is so weak. So that is the first thing which Vice Admiral Ghormade also said, have a strong military. And having a strong military means sustained growth of the country from which you can churn out a lot of economic benefits for capability and capacity enhancement. So growth and security both go hand in hand. So that is where military power has to be kept at a level for the unforeseen or for contingencies which you would have planned for. So both these things require a strong economy, and that is where we all must focus on. Whose responsibility is it for national security? It's a collective responsibility of the country. So here is a situation where outsourcing security only to the security forces is, I think, absolutely a bad thought. What we have to look at is the entire country. Each and every citizen is responsible for the national security. And if you have that kind of a population aligned towards national security, the problem is no more a problem. In fact, it becomes an opportunity. Where do I derive this example from? You look at Israel. You look at Israel where every citizen has to go through the churn, whether male or female, for a certain number of months, and then they move into the civil domain. Immediately, they are so well aligned because they have been the practitioners, they have been the users, they identify what technology is required, what solutions are required. They step into the defense production, they step into the research and development, they step into academia, and then they are able to contribute much higher. I am no proponent of conscription in India. I am a firm proponent of nationalism in India. When I'm talking of nationalism, please do not misunderstand me of what you see on the roads. That's not the definition of nationalism. And to have nationalism, it has to start from each one's home, from each one's class one. Unless you do that, you're not able to get collective contribution to national security. If you have a troubled hinterland, how can you leverage military power? So my focus here, I'm trying to bring on a stable interior based on which you can leverage military power externally. For internal stability, obviously you have a system in place. They also have to be professionals. So if you have a strong hinterland, absolutely aligned to the national cause, your military power can be leveraged beautifully. There are structures, there are capacities, there are capabilities which have to be built up, and that ensures that your military power acts as a deterrent, and it acts as a deterrent till such time your adversary becomes adventurous. Once he becomes adventurous, that is the time the combat phase begins. So the military power has to be capable of deterring your adversaries, which essentially means conflict avoidance. If you have conflict avoidance, you are able to have a better economy. You are able to use your resources much better. And by having a faster rate of growth, you are then again able to churn that money into the security, a part of it, which makes your military more contemporary technology-wise, processes-wise, procedures-wise, and the human resource capability. So that is the reason where I say conflict avoidance is what essentially the military power is meant to do. If that is not possible, that is when you go into conflict and you get a sure shot victory for the country. Now, again, here, leveraging military power in the deterrence domain brings in the issues of certain exhibitionism. Now, certain exhibitionism is not left only to exhibits. It is to show the world that we are serious about it and we are doing something which is on the path of progress. For example, when the government announced the post of CDS, it was a continuation of something which should have happened many years ago. But once you announced that there is going to be a CDS and there's going to be integration of forces, that is when you were able to send a message across to people who are watching you, or those who are not even watching you sat up and started watching you, that there is something which is happening across the mountain ranges or across the seas. And here these people are now getting their act right, which we should have done possibly 25 years ago. So when the structural changes came, along with that, after we had decided what we have to do, we started bringing in more changes, and those are actions in progress which are related to theaterization. Prior to this, did we do nothing? No, that's not the case. After Kargil, we decided that jointmanship is required. So jointmanship is always one step earlier than integration. In that jointmanship, we started and we raised an integrated defense services headquarter IDS as we say, which was supposed to ensure bringing the three services closer, ensuring that we do not waste our resources in duplication, and ensuring that there are no gaps. So wherever inter-services gaps were there, IDS was supposed to bring them together. Even in the intelligence domain, we brought in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and after that, we realized that there is more than that which requires to be done based on the modern warfare. In modern warfare, we have cyber space extremely important. So we looked at a defense cyber agency, which was raised 3 years ago, in fact, 3 years and a month back, and which is obviously coming of age. It takes time for these new organizations to come and be fully potent. Defense Space Agency is also one such agency which came up. And now to start comparing these with China may be a little too premature. So you need time. And once you need time and you start developing them in terms of technology, in terms of skills, in terms of processes, for which we have to go in for strategic partnerships. A large number of these happen, but they don't get announced and they should not get announced. A party which is slightly weaker than the other does not have the luxury of announcing everything. And that is what is known as strategic culture in a country. In a country, when the media or the parliamentarians start demanding transparency to a level that it can endanger the military power or the national power, I think that country is not headed in the right direction. That kind of transparency and that kind of questioning the intent needs to be put away for the next few years. Again, look at China. When Deng Xiaoping mentioned that they have to, as the Westerners called, hide and bite, but actually in Mandarin it is maintaining a low profile, is what exactly he was propounding. Having come of age at a particular time when Xi Jinping thought he must now depart from that traditional approach, and that is when he said, okay, now we go in for national rejuvenation, now we go for the China dream, and now we are here to announce our arrival, and that is when gradually you started seeing them flexing muscles. That still is a little way off when they might go all out. So that is another lesson which we have to learn, that leveraging military power, as long as you are in a position to translate that into something meaningful. If you cannot do that, I think the time is not right to start announcing. But have we not leveraged our military power? We have. In our own limited way, when Doklam happened, we took our troops and stopped the Chinese. What was the announcement? The announcement was for the neighborhood that if India is a friend, it will stand by you. It will come to your physical help. And that is exactly what we did. And thereafter, we leave it to Bhutan how they want to handle it. But we did what we were supposed to do as per our own righteousness. Thereafter, when we look at what happened in Uri, or prior to Doklam, what happened in Uri, and thereafter when the surgical strikes had gone in, what was the message that was being sent? That look, all across the Western Front, Kashmir centric, we will not tolerate nonsense. And you deal a kinetic blow on us, you get a kinetic blow 7 times harder than what you had even imagined. So that was the message where the military power was leveraged. Similarly, in our hinterland, when something went wrong in Pulwama and when you use the air power, it was again an announcement that look, enough is enough and we can reach out and get to you and catch you by your throat. So don't try it again. So that was the kind of messaging that we have been sending across. So these are the few examples which I gave you. Historically, when I mentioned that how the national power has to be increased, in our country, kings and queens have been ruling their states in the best possible manner as was possible during that time. History may have painted the entire picture as very gloomy and saying that we were a bunch of inefficient and weak and ineffective conglomeration of kingdoms, and that is not entirely true. In fact, it depends on who writes the history and what is the intent. So we have to dip into our history and see the kind of strategy that Krishna taught us, the kind of righteousness that Ram taught us, the kind of statecraft that Kautilya taught us, and that is where we will understand when and how to leverage military power, how much of it is to be leveraged, and then again you come to the collective contribution towards the national security, where if you see there are democracies and there are authoritarian states both which have gone in for conscription because that is one effective way of creating nationalism right from the word go among the youth. The Republic of Korea, Singapore, these are the countries which have conscription. You have China and Russia also. You have Israel also. There are more number of countries. Do we need to have this kind of conscription? May not be required, may not be possible also logistically, but that doesn't stop us from ensuring that our youth are aligned to nationalism. That is one. And secondly, the rest of the population should also be aligned. Do I say that we are not aligned to nationalism? No, not at all. You look in the last about 3 days, the kind of support that has got garnered, and where we have seen the kind of citizens coming, displaying, whether it is from Metupalayam, whether it is from Sulur, whether it's from Coimbatore, the kind of people who rushed into that accident site where the Mi-17 crashed. You look at the kind of entire path from General Rawat's home to Brar Square where he and his wife were cremated. You look at the kind of support that, what does it mean? At heart, you are a strong nationalist. What is required? The channelizing and the guidance is what is required. Where does it come from? It comes from the leadership. Which leadership? It comes from the political leadership, the bureaucratic leadership, and policy formulation in a manner that this energy is not wasted in trying to do something which is wrong for the country and being destructive. So leveraging military power is only contingent to the human resource being channelized properly. Let me come to another issue. When we saw that the initiative taken and when we announced that, okay, we will have 2+2 meetings. What does 2+2 meeting means? The Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Defense have come together. Why have they come together? They have come together for a simple reason, that whenever both these elements of comprehensive national power are brought together, we will be able to get better results. Why has the country still continued with the confidence in the Indian Army to continue talking to the Chinese military leadership in Eastern Ladakh? Because the country feels that when a diplomat talks to a Chinese military man, there is no dialogue. But the moment you have an Indian military officer talking to a Chinese military officer, yes, definitely, Ministry of External Affairs is very much in synergy, very much aligned to whatever is being discussed. So that is where we realize that both the diplomatic as well as the military power, when synergized, will give best possible results. When we look at what happened when the Foreign Secretary and the Chief of Army Staff visited Myanmar together and then visited Bangladesh together, what did it show? It showed the world that here is a country which is getting two of its own verticals together, coming together irrespective of those old things which were spoken of, status, equivalence, nonsense. As far as we are concerned, nation comes first, and that's exactly how we are supposed to do. Coming to the point of grand national strategy, everyone is extremely fond of using big words and kind of adjectives and adverbs. India is a country which is a civilizational state. We have always believed in civilization, which is a process of evolution. And when we find solutions, we find the most simple solutions for ourselves. How have we or our ancestors or our forefathers aligned every individual in the country to a national vision? I have spoken about this very many times earlier, and let me reiterate here. Some of the students may have heard me speaking about this. Do you need a long and a verbose document to explain what is your national vision? I don't think so. You get up early in the morning and you just visualize, my country has to be the best, my country has to be a winner. And that's exactly what each soldier, sailor, and airman and officers of the armed forces greet each other with. We start our day and we end our day by saying Jai Hind. What is Jai Hind? Jai Hind means my country will be a winner in everything, be it Olympics or be it conflict or be it during peacetime short of conflict. So a national vision, the moment you have that my country has to be victorious always, the strategy automatically falls in place, whether it is the Ministry of External Affairs, whether it's the Ministry of Defense, whether it's Ministry of Road and Transport, whether it is Ministry of Railways or Civil Aviation or Environment or any state government which is along the borders or along the coastal areas. So it is very simple. We don't have to complicate it by going and downloading documents from the West who believe in bringing such complications so that people reach out to them to ask them how to simplify it. We are simple people with very clear mind. Let us be that. And with that, I want to end my intervention here. I'll be ready for any questions. Thank you.
Talking right from Doklam, sir, to Balakot, to Pulwama, all that, sir. It was actually subtle messaging what you were talking about. And we found a conventional answer to a sub-conventional event in Pulwama, sir, under the nuclear hang, sir. It is that decision, political responsibility of the surgical strikes and also. It's very important messaging the way you have said that the enemy, wherever he or she might be, India will pursue them. Also, sir, the way Admiral Bhokre sir encapsulated the entire importance of maritime aspect, 70, 80, 90, 100 might get stuck to the minds of the students here, sir. And in terms of this whole aspects of grand strategy, you all had been trying to make it easier for the students, for everyone, for the practitioners also, with the examples which you have dotted at every point of things, sir. Thank you so much the way you all have given your talk, sir. And thank you for jutting in at the very emergent time, sir. Thank you so much. I hand over the entire proceedings to Manish. And there might be certain questions which might come up here, sir. Manish, please take over the.
Thank you, Mayank. I just also want to be, I hope I'm audible enough. Yeah. So thank you, Mayank, and thank you, Ghormade sir and Lieutenant General Khandare for, I think, very clearly pointing out how, for example, what sort of vision the Indian Navy has about leveraging military power, and Khandare Saab also talking out very clearly what sort of thinking goes into planning military or leveraging military power. Sir, I have a couple of questions. In fact, either of you could answer. Till then, and again, let me also point out that we are not only joined by students, so it's a mix of faculty, it's a mix of defense professionals, it's a mix of also PhD students from across the country, and many of them, in fact, are also joining on YouTube, where we are live streaming now. So the question is, sir, we have been signing these multiple logistics agreements with the Americans. So there seems to be some sort of, is there some dispute emerging that we still largely use Russian equipments, Russian defense equipments, and now increasingly are diversifying. So this whole question of interoperability, so how is that affecting our military projection across different domains? That is number one. And number two, also in terms of military diplomacy, military to military ties. In fact, me and Khandare Saab also were discussing this earlier when we met personally a couple of weeks ago. That how is that? Because for example, look at Pakistan. Pakistan, I mean, ultimately, why does it have a closer relationship, a much closer relationship, other than different factors? One of the very important reasons is also very deep-rooted military to military ties with the Americans. So, to what extent is India taking its military ties forward? There have been obviously many, initiatives recently, and I think one point which I remember, which I think Khandare Saab was also hinting at, and in fact, which was alluded to very frontally by RSS Sarsanchalak Mohan Bhagwatji at Veer Savarkar's book launch, where I had the privilege of attending that, where he said, what was happening was this whole military policy. Khandare Saab was talking about the external affairs. You have this 2+2. So what was happening earlier was that the foreign policy was really dictating the military policy, the defense policy. And in fact, it's only since largely 2014 that this reversal is happening, that India's defense policy, the nation first idea, is really up there now in the uppermost minds of the strategic thinkers, and that is now actually dictating India's foreign policy also. So I think these are the couple of questions which we would like either Ghormade Saab or both of them to very briefly answer if it's possible.
Satish, you can take on. Satish, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, go ahead with the first one, the logistics part, interoperability.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So to bring this very clearly, that we have been buying defense equipment from the Russia initially. And why did we buy from Russia? Because it was not available from the other Western fronts at that particular time. And Russia has been a good friend and a strategic partner, has been giving us the equipment when required. However, things had changed over the period, and we have also realized that we need to get the best out of the available technology. And therefore, what is in Indian national interest, we have gone and had logistics arrangements with the other countries also. And this has resulted in getting us various Western equipments, which may be from the US. But the best thing about Ingenuity is that our people are so good that we have been able to integrate all these weapons and sensors from various sources and have been able to utilize. And in fact, if you see the Indian warships, we have Indian equipment, we have the Western equipment, we have the Russian equipment, we have the Italian, we have others, and all of them have been integrated, and we have been able to formulate and ensure that it achieves the desired aim. So I think there's a lot to learn. And with all this, we are aiming towards further innovations and indigenization. So I think there's a win-win situation. The whole purpose is to have the best bang for the buck. That means you stretch every rupee to the maximum to get maximum out of it and get the capability for the nation. The second part, so you can.
Yeah. Okay. Manish, your point about these logistics agreement, what Admiral Ghormade has said. In addition to that, I want to just make it clear there are certain logistic agreements which are very transitory in nature. For example, when the ships or the aircrafts are coming to India, then they are just given the basic requirements that they need, which I think goes along with our ethos that somebody comes to you, you definitely do give it to them. And the same thing is reciprocated by them. So when you look at Lemoa is what? Essentially, if their ships or if their aircrafts come and land here, you'll give them fuel, you'll ensure that the people are looked after, the security of the aircraft or the ship is looked after. So there's something which I don't think too much of notice should be taken of that. And it's not only with the Americans, it's with other countries as well. And please ensure that people who feel that this is something maybe that we are leaning towards anybody, we are not leaning towards anyone. And that's where my answer for the second question becomes that I think if you've read what the External Affairs Minister has written, Mr. Jaishankar, in his book, The India Way, what emerges very clearly is that it is the India way. We have dehyphenated our relations. We are not a part of any bloc. You know, we were never a part of the bloc during the Cold War also. And even if we people say that, okay, Asia is going to see another Cold War, so be it. We will chart our way through troubled waters as per our national interest. And in military diplomacy, we have or even in the overall diplomacy, we have the best possible relations where people are fighting with each other or have tense relations with each other. So we are talking to Iranians, we are talking to Israelis, we are talking to Saudis, we are talking to the Emirates. There's nothing wrong in our relations with Myanmar or Bangladesh. I've just given out a few names of countries which may not sit on the same table. But as far as India is concerned, there's nothing wrong. We've been having the best possible relations. And when it comes to the military diplomacy part, we have our defense attaches in about 70, over 44 countries, and we intend increasing by about 10 or 12 because obviously we realize that this is a changed world. How does Pakistan do it, or how do other countries do it? They have been doing it historically in a better manner because in Pakistan, the center of power has always been the Pakistan military, Pakistan Army to be specific, ISI, and the clerics. Now there, if they have to send a retired admiral or a general to some place, they do. If they have to send a retired admiral as an ambassador to Maldives or to Indonesia, they do that. And they use these experienced practitioners to the best of their capability. Okay, we've also done it, but there is scope for much more beyond the job of the defense attaché. The defense attaches earlier, up to a particular point in time, was considered to be a ceremonial appointment. It's no more a ceremonial appointment. Let me tell you very clearly, the charter has changed. They are doing much more than what the previous defense attaches could have thought of. That generation is over. The present generation, the defense attaches and the ambassadors both are doing much more in terms of identifying technology, getting technology, increasing or enhancing our efforts for defense exports. You name a thing and you find them there. There is hardly any reluctance or hesitation towards that. And any country where you reach out and you have a system of ensuring that whatever you have promised is delivered, the problem is here. The last part, that is our defense production sector is yet to gear up to the levels where we should be there. And I think that is something which I may talk in my next session with you. So I don't want to let the cat out of the bag here. And military diplomacy essentially is much different from what it was earlier. But is that all? No, we have to do much more. And that is where, again, the two ministries, that is the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of External Affairs, have to get their act right. And they have to make use of other ministries as well. Like there are countries who require road infrastructure. You'll be surprised, till date, the Border Roads Organization was not supposed to bid for international contracts for road creation, while China has an equivalent of border roads, which was busy doing it. So there, when we have something like this in Oil and Natural Gas Commission, why is it not followed in the other ministries as well? So that is where the kind of fusion that is required, the best practices of each ministry are required to be followed. And I think we have a long way to go, a lot of hard work to do. The navigational points have been identified. It's only that we have to travel on that.
Before I hand over back to Mayank, Professor Krishna is joining from Tirupati. Please be very brief in your question.
Thank you, Manish. My question is to the panel. Sir, you said about nationalism and how India has a historical idea of nationalism. But I want to ask you, when China has, it had a clear policy to play in a subdued kind of thing, and then later announced its arrival. Does India also has any such outlook or any such projection? Because I don't see in the public domain anything like that. So, as a nation, what is that you want? What is the aim in 10 years, 20 years, defense-wise, military-wise? There's nothing. So, can the panel clarify?
Professor Krishna, thank you for your question. And I think this question transcends the military domain. It goes into the civil domain. It goes to the whole of nation approach. You know, when you talk of whole of nation approach, even before you sneeze, the media gives out that you're about to sneeze or you've sneezed. So here, there is nothing that the military can actually do or what the government can do. These are very known peculiarities of a democracy which we have to accept. And while we may want to have the same example replicated, but it's not possible in a democracy, and we all realize that. So does it mean that we just do nothing about it? No, it's not so. At times, even the wrong announcements made by media are cleverly used, and it helps also, but not always. At times, it puts you in a lot of trouble with nations who are looking at you for good relations. Some months back, some media guy had given out some figment of imagination as to what is going to happen in Bangladesh. That gentleman had to be pulled up, and that was done very quietly, so that his self-esteem is also not hurt. Otherwise, he becomes a sworn enemy of the country, and then he goes on a rampage. So there are ways and means in the country which necessarily need not be disclosed, but there are ways and means of ensuring. But we will not be able to have the same kind of structure, behavior, or processes as are available in autocratic countries to our west as well as to our north.
Thank you. Over to back to Mayank Singh for the formal vote of thanks, and let me also get his institutional affiliation right, that he is a senior defense correspondent with the New Indian Express. So back to you, Mayank.
Thank you so much, Manish. And the way the spectrum, the way the things have been covered today, might be unraveling the knots, lots of knots, mental knots, which people have regarding the questions of national security perspective, the drivers, the comprehensive relation power. And one point which is important is, in terms of future, lots of stress is being given to the NCC now. ND has also been open for the girls, women officers now. So, and it is India which had been teaching people since old ages about the ethics of war. And the way the two officers, Vice Admiral Ghormade and Lieutenant Vinod Khandare, brought out the things, it had been a lovely evening, sir. And this 1 hour might be so much helpful that we can bring out lots of important aspects and understandings. We would like to thank you for everything and the way you prepared the notes, the way you, express the things. Thank you so much, sir. And we'll keep bothering you with lots of other issues to be talked about to our Indian Futures listeners, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you very much. And over to you, Manish, for the next important session now.
Always a pleasure, Mayank. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayank.
Thank you, Mayank, and thank both esteemed panelists who really gave very brilliant presentations on leveraging military power. With this, we now move to the next session, which is an equally important, and I think, in fact, I see it actually as very important because cutting across all the presentations since yesterday, most of them have been talking about institutional design, institutional capacity. Are we really equipped to carry out successful grand strategy? And to take this session ahead, we have with us Professor Aayushi Ketkar, who is my colleague in National Security Studies in JNU, and also our honorary director of our National Security Program. So over to you, Professor Aayushi.
Thank you. Thank you, Manish, and welcome everybody to the 5th session of the first Indraprastha Grand Strategy Conference. Am I audible? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, you are audible.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So this 5th session actually builds upon what has been discussed over the last 4 sessions. In fact, yesterday we had a very engaging and stimulating foundation based on history, economics, and grand power politics. And today, the first session that has happened is on a very important topic of the role of military. So this takes the discussions forward. It talks of institutions, especially institutional design and capacity. To begin with, I would just like, provide some food for thought. There's a very important, quote by Edward O. Wilson. He's an American biologist and works at Harvard. And his couple of impactful works, The Future of Life and the Meaning of Human Existence, he mentions about institutions. He says, the real problem of humanity today is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. This is terrifically dangerous, and it is now approaching a point of crisis. So we have this kind of view, a rather, you must say, a slightly pessimistic view on one side. And on the other hand, you have a more creative, constructive, and engaging view of institutions, which says, you are as good as the institutions you create and nurture. So between those two ends, we have a very distinguished panel of speakers today, belonging to extremely distinguished institutions, because you like it or you hate it, you cannot negate the fact of the centrality of institutions when it comes to the overall grand strategy of a nation. And this is all the more important in democracies, where the necessity of choice becomes important. And that happens to be our sub-theme of this first Indraprastha conference, the necessity for choice. So in democracies, the role of institutions is critical. And we have a wonderful panel of 3 distinguished speakers from 3 distinguished institutions, namely the defense, the foreign services, and academics. So today, welcome to the speakers. We have Ambassador Mohan Kumar to begin with, and then followed by Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare, or probably Professor Sumit Ganguly even. So to begin with you, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, he needs no introduction, but just for our students, I would like to mention that Ambassador Mohan Kumar is a former diplomat, and is currently the chairman of a leading think tank of India, namely the Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, RIS. Over to you, Ambassador. He will be speaking on MEA's role in enabling successful grand strategy for India. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank my friend, Dr. Manish Dabare, for this opportunity. It appears you've had some wonderful sessions, so I hope this session will also live up to the high standards that has been set by this forum and this conference. So I will maybe speak for 5 to 7 minutes. Is that okay, Madam Chair? Okay.
That's exactly the framework. We expect you to speak for about 10 minutes. And then we hope to have a robust question and answer session as well.
Wonderful. So I will cover 3 aspects since I don't want to be too long. One is the sheer numbers of diplomats we have in the Foreign Service and the Ministry of External Affairs. So manpower, that is the first. The second thing that I would like to look at is really the training, the ability, the skill set that you need, that diplomats need. Are we doing it right? Third, the budget of the External Affairs Ministry. And I would like to make a radical proposal, which will immediately make me the sworn enemy of all the IAS officers in the country, but that's fine. I have to say what I have to say. So the third is the budget. And the last one would be really the economic growth in the country and whether resources are available. Because frankly, you can speak as much grant, and this is something, I'm not saying this only in this conference, Manish ji has heard me before, so I can repeat it. All this talk of grand strategy will come to naught if you do not grow by 9 to 10% for the next 10 years. That is my fundamental basic minimum. You can keep talking of high power ambition, regional ambition, grand ambition. It will come to naught. And I really mean that. And that's why I'm repeating it. So I think that is the backbone. It's not so much how you do the other things. So these are the four things that I will quickly cover. First, the sheer number in the External Affairs Ministry. A lot has been said about this. Famous quotes by Shashi Tharoor, by others saying that it's ridiculous and so on. I just want to make 2 or 3 points in this regard. One, I think the numbers game has been now more or less settled. We, from 2007, we have been recruiting very large numbers by Indian standards. That is, we are talking 30 to 40 people. When I joined the Foreign Service in 1981, there were 20 people, and we stuck to 20 for a long time. Then, for reasons I wasn't able to fathom, between the end of 1990s to the 2007, India did something really, really stupid. For example, in the Foreign Service, we recruited 10 people. And in the Indian Administrative Service, we recruited 40 or 50 people. I think it made no sense whatsoever for a large country like India, but the damage was done between 1996-97 for a period of 10 years. As I said, from 2007, we are okay. So as of today, there is no problem in the Ministry of External Affairs as far as foot soldiers are concerned, to use a military analogy. So I'm talking of undersecretaries, deputy secretaries, and so on. These will become joint secretaries in 5 years. So I do not anticipate a problem at the joint secretary level as well. So plus we have done 2 things. We hire consultants, which is fantastic. One of my former students in the Jindal Global University where I teach is now a consultant, and he's having a great time. He didn't make it into the Foreign Service. India, the problem is this is a ridiculously and fiercely competitive exam. So it is true that an idiot will not be able to make it, but it is true that a lot of good, intelligent people will be left out. That's just the reality of it. So I think we should make use of people who are passionate about external affairs, who want to work as consultants. That's been done. A beginning has been made, but I think we should do much more. The other thing we have done is we've got people from other ministries to work in the External Affairs Ministry with the proviso that they will not automatically be entitled to foreign postings and so on, because, you know, that will affect the morale and the promotion prospects for people who get into the Foreign Service. But I'm happy to say we've got a lot of wonderful people from the Administrative Service, from the Railway Service, from even PWD, because they need to execute the projects. You cannot expect a Foreign Service officer to execute a very complicated Kaladan project, which involves Myanmar, India, and Bangladesh. It is stupid to expect a foreign, just as it is stupid to expect an IAS officer to go from being chairman Air India to the head of the space agency to being, or to suddenly make a district collector ETA or ETAWA to be our trade negotiator in Geneva. That is stupid also. So I think at least in the External Affairs Ministry, we've got now a set of people. So I think the numbers game, as I said, we are okay. may not be ideal, but I think the bad old days are behind. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is on the budget. Or maybe I should do the training and the skill set second. Sorry, I'll come to the budget third. On the training and skill set, some of you will be shocked to know that in 1981, when I joined the Foreign Service, there was no Foreign Service Institute. There was no training in Delhi. We were just asked to hop from one joint secretary to the other. And the joint secretary will usually end up extremely disturbed upon seeing us. And he will say, listen, why don't you go watch a movie in a theater? Why are you, because joint secretaries are busy people. Some joint secretaries, I was lucky, I think they took some interest and they trained us. Compared to that, and I'm not 100 years old, I'm talking 1981 batch, I'm not talking 100 years ago, 1981, 82. The situation now is much better. We have a good Foreign Service Institute where skills are being imparted. The other big change that has happened is guys like me had to learn French the hard way. I had to go to Congo, I had to go to Morocco to learn French. Now, I personally took interest and sent at least 5 people, not just to Sorbonne, but to the institute in Monterey, California. And we have 10 people who can now speak French at interpretation level. So skill set, training, and learning on the job is much, much better. I don't want to get into the details. The Foreign Service Institute has got very good modules on administration, finance, and they get people like me and others who talk to them. So it's much better. The third is the budget. And this is where I have a huge gripe. We cannot run a successful foreign policy with 0.5% of the national budget. And last year, this is for the current year, 2021-22. 2020-21, it was an all-time low of 0.45%. It's the lowest in the last 10 years. You cannot have a successful foreign policy with a ridiculous budget like 0.5%. My radical suggestion is you have to hive off the MEA, and MEA has to report to PMO, and the budgetaries, we cannot be going and begging for funds from the Ministry of Finance. It doesn't make sense to me. They treat us exactly the way they treat Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. They treat us exactly like the Ministry of Agriculture. And they say, and the usual yardstick is you ask for 120%. Everybody who's worked in the government knows this, it's no secret. Ask for 120%, you will get 80%. That way, you are covering up for everybody's incompetence. You ask more, and the Finance Ministry will kid itself that it has cut down the demand by 20%. Everybody is happy. But at the end of the day, you have a lousy foreign policy also because the budget, 18,000 crores 2021-22, which constitutes 0.5%, out of which 7,500 crores is aid for neighboring countries. So it's not even 18,000. 7,500 is for aid. So you're left with 11,000 crores. What you can do with 11,000 crores, God alone knows. So I would want a radical change there. I think we have to find a way by which you have to circumvent the normal finance procedures and get money. If you don't trust, you would trust, the funny thing in the government is, even when I was ambassador in Paris, the government would trust me with top secret matters, including Rafale and so on. But they won't trust me with more than $1,000. I will have 3 accountant generals sitting on me saying, why did you spend that money? And I have to spend a good 30% of my time justifying why I spent. This is absolutely nonsensical, frankly. You are crippling diplomats and it makes no sense. So finance is a big, big issue. My last point is, as I said earlier, all this talk of a robust foreign policy is not possible if India does not grow. And I'm saying it for a couple of reasons. First, of course, you need resources, and you can get resources only if you can generate resources. We are a 2.8 trillion economy. 40% of it is foreign trade. So if you cannot export, if you cannot import, you're not going to get more resources. You will never become a 5 trillion economy if you don't grow, and you don't grow in terms of foreign trade. This is what is going to give you diplomatic clout. The more you open your market up, EU will come to you automatically and ask for an FTA. You don't have to go begging for people with FTA if you can grow at 9%. Everybody will salivate at the prospect of gaining access to the Indian market. EU, United States, everybody will be at your doorstep. China is the classic example. Now, of course, it's a different story, but I'm saying, and you need to do this consistently over time so that your market becomes the magnet with which countries approach you, which bestows on you valuable diplomatic leverage. So this is something we need. This is frankly a sine qua non for me. You can have the best diplomats, you can make them speak the best English, you can write excellent cipher reports, you can have a grand strategy, any number of conferences, all of it will amount to nothing if you do not have resources. And India can only get resources if it grows. And it can only grow to a 5 trillion economy, for example, if it can trade more and more. I'll stop here, Manish ji, but I'm happy, Madam Chair, I'm happy to take questions later. But that's basically what I wanted to say in brief. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That's always a lot of food for thought from you. And most of the time, very out of the box views, which are very important for even working out a grand strategy. So thank you for touching upon those very important aspects, which deals with quantity, quality, and finance, which is the lifeline of any setup that we can think of. So we then move on to the next speaker. Professor Ganguly, are you okay with it? Yes? Yes, sir? So Professor Sumit Ganguly, who is our next speaker, is a distinguished professor of political science and the Rabindranath Tagore Chair, which deals in Indian culture and civilization at the Indiana University, USA. He is a prolific writer and has written extensively on India's foreign policy, the Indo-Pak relations. One of his books, which is going to be critical in today's discussion, is Ascending India and its State Capacity, where he talks about how institutions are important when it comes to building states' capacity and how it should be nurtured and kind of worked upon. So over to you, Professor Ganguly. Look forward to your views on this.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm delighted to be here this morning. Well, it's morning here, it's evening in India. I have been asked to talk about the significance of grand strategy, particularly in academia. And that's exactly what I will focus on. And since I'm here in the United States and I have worked here for the last almost 30 years, I will focus first on American grand strategy. First, I'll talk about what I understand to be grand strategy. Second, I'll talk about an application of the idea and the US grand strategy. During, excuse me, someone keeps interrupting. US grand strategy during the Cold War. Third, I will talk about the development of a new grand strategy in the United States in the post-Cold War era. Then the fourth, I will talk about India's grand strategy during the Cold War. And fifth, very briefly, I'll talk about the need for a new Indian grand strategy and how that might emerge. So that's the structure of my talk. First, in terms of what exactly is grand strategy, so that we have a common understanding of this concept. Grand strategy, as I understand it, involves marshaling a country's economic, military, and societal resources to pursue a set of defined national interests. That you have a set of national interests, and how do you then mobilize your societal resources, your economic resources, your military resources to relentlessly pursue those national goals and interests. But this, of course, requires an identification, a clear understanding of what constitutes your national interests before you can mobilize these resources to achieve those particular ends. During the Cold War, the US had a very explicit grand strategy. All these resources were husbanded and marshaled towards one simple end, the defeat of the Soviet Union. That was the central goal of American grand strategy. American grand strategy was geared towards defeating Soviet communism across the globe. And all resources, diplomatic, military, economic, were brought together to that particular end. It was a very clear-cut strategy and pursued relentlessly across administrations. Now, certain administrations might have emphasized military tools more, say, for example, during the Reagan administration, the two Reagan administrations. A different administration like Carter might have emphasized diplomacy to a greater extent. But the point is that regardless of administration, regardless of their ideological coloring, every administration was focused on meeting that central goal, which was this titanic struggle against the Soviet Union and a careful bringing together of all these resources to defeat Soviet power. And it was pursued relentlessly across administrations. But as I said, with the emphases varying in terms of the use of particular tools. Specific administrations might have emphasized particular tools of foreign and security policy as opposed to others, but there was never any doubt about the central goals of American grand strategy. At the end of the Cold War, the US was faced with a bit of a conundrum, a bit of a problem. Because with the Soviet Union collapsing, with communism no longer this existential threat as it had been construed by a range of administrations during the Cold War, the US needed a new grand strategy. And for a while, the US floundered. There was no clear sense of what should be the lodestars, what should be the guiding posts of American foreign policy, because as several public intellectuals mentioned in the United States, that we may actually miss the Cold War because the Cold War provided certain clear organizing concepts for American foreign and security policy and American grand strategy. And suddenly, between 1989 and 1990, this vanished. After some discussion, some debate, some consideration, the US then seized upon a new grand strategy. And it really emerged during the first Clinton administration. And it was focused on promoting democratic capitalism on a global basis. So both an emphasis on democracy and an emphasis on free markets, on the enlargement of markets across the world, and also the enlargement of democracy. On the latter, let me be quite clear. There were important limitations and tensions. The US continued to work with a number of squalid regimes across the world because they were of strategic importance. For example, with Saudi Arabia, hardly a democracy by any definition and unlikely to be one in my lifetime. But out of strategic necessity, the US continued to work with certain regimes which were considerably less than democratic, and the democracy enlargement agenda really did not influence American policy. But at bottom, these were became the two guiding principles, the two lodestars in American foreign policy. The expansion of free markets across the globe, particularly in the former Soviet Union and elsewhere, and simultaneously an attempt at democratic enlargement, albeit pursued somewhat fitfully. And that generally has been pursued by every administration, the last 4 years being a striking departure. What animated that administration still remains a mystery to me, other than some notion of crude notion of putting American interests first. But even the characterization of what constitute American interests was extremely narrow, bizarre, and idiosyncratic. The last 4 years I consider to be an aberration in American foreign policy, and one hopes one does not return to those 4 years. For someone like me, it was like waking up from a prolonged nightmare, because foreign policy, security policy was almost based upon personal whims and vagaries and idiosyncrasies of the occupant of the White House. And there was no coherent grand strategy beyond some vague notion of putting America first. And many of the policies that were pursued were actually fundamentally detrimental to American interests, and I can talk about this at much greater length. We've returned now to a much greater degree of normalcy in terms of the pursuit of American foreign policy interests under the current administration. And again, a focus on those two issues that I had talked about, and especially the pursuit of democratic expansion, again with tensions, as several people have pointed out in a number of thoughtful columns in major American newspapers and opinion journals, that this summit for democracy that Biden has organized has brought a number of countries whose democratic credentials leave something to be desired. But we can discuss that again at length. The point is that there has been a return again to those two cardinal principles that had been enunciated during the Clinton administration. And for the most part, there's an embrace of those principles by the Biden administration. Finally, let me now turn to India, since I'm primarily talking to an Indian audience, if not exclusively so. During the Cold War, India had a clear-cut grand strategy, and that was basically non-alignment. It was not flawless. After all, India had a fairly robust strategic relationship with the Soviet Union, and in fact was acutely dependent on the Soviet Union for military hardware. And it constrained India's choices to some degree, at least in my judgment, and that's what I've written in a number of works. But the point is, nevertheless, that was India's grand strategy, that India was going to pursue this independent course in foreign policy and would make decisions largely to boost its own interests and not be swayed by either bloc or become completely dependent on either bloc, and pursue a independent and foreign policy basically designed to enhance its own standing in global affairs and to promote a more equitable North-South relationship, keeping in mind the interests of developing countries. So there was a non-alignment basically provided the basis for an Indian grand strategy. Even though there are still proponents of non-alignment today, it's really not a meaningful doctrine anymore to pursue in today's world. And to a large degree, as I understand it, it's been replaced by the concept of strategic autonomy. Now, the concept of strategic autonomy is all well and good. Any power of any consequence would want to pursue a policy of strategic autonomy. But beyond that, it does not give India enough purchase in terms of a grand strategy. And I think it is time that a debate ensue within India about what are the principal goals other than wanting to become a power of some consequence in the global order. Beyond that, what are the key goals that India wishes to accomplish in the global order, and what should be and how should resources be marshaled to meet those ends? Beyond the notion of strategic autonomy, beyond the notion of wanting to be a country of some consequence, to have a voice in global affairs, and to be able to shape key global institutions. Beyond that, what does it hope to accomplish, and what kind of role does it intend to play in the global order in the 21st century? That should be the focus of Indian grand strategy moving forward. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that very comprehensive view. That brings us to the last speaker of the day, and that again is Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare ji. Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare has been the former military advisor to the National Security Council Secretariat and the Director General of Defense Intelligence Agency. We really appreciate his interventions today. He's made some very interesting comments with special reference to the importance of civilizational wisdom in solving problems in the last session. And now he will be speaking on the recent reforms in national security decision-making in this session. Thank you so much, sir, for being here, especially at a time when you lost one of your dear friends and probably a senior as well, CDS Bipin Rawatji. Thank you, despite that personal loss, for continuing your commitment with being with TIF today with us, and for the wonderful interventions you've already made. And we look forward to your points in this session as well. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aayushi, and very kind of you to have mentioned General Rawat. And like I said earlier, yes, it's a personal and a national loss. So I go ahead from there, business as usual, because that is what is there in a soldier's life. Let me do justice, or try to do justice, to whatever responsibility you've given me. In the first part, I want to say that when we talk of the reforms for national security, the understanding that national security is a comprehensive aspect. It encompasses many domains, many issues. And from the national perspective, you're looking at the physical protection of your territory, the sovereignty. Then you're also looking at water security, you're looking at food security, energy security, you're looking at intellectual security, technological security, the production, the industrial production security. There are a whole lot of things. Why am I mentioning this? There is a requirement of these different departments and ministries to come together at the relevant time for the relevant aspect and bring in synergy. Now, there is a lot of synergy which is required between the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of External Affairs. The same thing is required between the Ministry of Roads and Transport for the forward area infrastructure. While people may say that what has the military got to do with the water? There's plenty that has got to do with water, because water is also used to ensure that the national defense is taken up to a particular level. At the same time, your adversaries' water supplies, if they are not entitled, should obviously not be given to them. And that's what is the national policy on that. We recently saw the kind of challenges in the biosecurity and biosafety. And I think this was the new challenge which came up. So finally, it is the reforms that are required have to be whole of government and whole of nation. It cannot be that only the military reforms will ensure the best possible national security. Anyway, coming to specifically to what are the few reforms that we need to look into. And giving the time constraint, I will only touch upon the few issues which are noticeable. Ambassador Mohan Kumar very correctly said the economic growth of the country is most essential. And that is where introspection was done. And we realized that there is a large segment of the government structure which is not churning out profits but is a fund guzzler. Specifically, the ordnance factory reforms which came in, the government has taken, or the nation has taken about 75 years to bring in these reforms in the defense production sector. About 15 to 18,000 crores of rupees are every year given to these ordnance factories. And what happens in the bargain? Do they churn out profits? No, not at all. In fact, they have a major lien over the defense budget. So neither are you getting the best of products, nor is the government getting the revenue out of it. So that is when the government decided that, okay, the Ordnance Factory Board, which colonial legacy wise was sitting in Calcutta while the job was in Delhi, so that has been disbanded. The 41 ordnance factories have been clubbed into 7 defense public sector undertaking companies, and they have been told that either perform or perish. 5 years of period will be there for handholding. So this is the first reform where we get whatever we deserve. And the ordnance factories, by the way, are not high technology. They are the low technology. And there is no reason for the country to say that after 75 years also, you're not able to equip your armed forces with low technology products. Low technology, the lowest is the uniform. And even if that is not good enough, then I think somebody definitely needs to look into what they're doing. So that is the first reform that we look at. There are other reforms which have happened institutionally. In my previous session, I gave out what has happened in terms of bringing in integration, bringing in jointness. I'm not repeating those. Coming to the next part, there is a challenge which is being addressed currently is about providing a level playing field to the public and the private sector. There are 9 defense production sector undertakings which are financed by the government. And what exactly are we doing? While the defense exports, again, Ambassador Mohan Kumar was very right. You have to increase the exports. You look at Russia, the largest earning from there is coming from their petroleum gas and military hardware. Now, where does India lack? India lacks because neither the DPSUs nor the ordnance factories are able to compete globally, where you can hive off a large part of the market that either Pakistan or China is having. There's no question because the quality is not of global standards. Pakistan, which did not have a single ordnance factory after 1947, went about, established 14 ordnance factories, which are doing much better than the Indian ordnance factories in terms of quality, quantity, the timeliness of providing, and the post-sale service, and obviously the pricing. These are the 4 benchmarks which have been fixed, that either you achieve this or there is something which is waiting around the corner which may be unpleasant. So that is the first important part, where about 15 to 18,000 crores for the next 5 years, obviously a little handholding will be required. That doesn't mean that all these 7 defense companies are going to be privatized. No, of course not. There are certain strategic sectors where you say build tanks or you build aircrafts or ships. That has to be kept under your own production. But it has been proven by the private sector that even things which were earlier a taboo, like manufacturing of ammunition, is being done beautifully in the private sector now. So that kind of an approach is one of the reform which increases our capacities. let me talk about other areas where the Ministry of Defense has to coordinate with other ministries for bringing in the best out of the country. We need forward area infrastructure. China has built up roads right up to the border or right up to the line of actual control. What went wrong in these last 75 years? You had the state government getting an allocation, building the roads the way they wanted. Obviously, citizen-friendly roads will be required. Could they have been aligned to the national security requirement? Yes, of course. What was missing? The synergy between the center and the state. You have the Ministry of Roads and Transport building roads as per their plan, and the Ministry of Defense with Border Roads Organization in the last 75 years did not have much of coordination with the road building ministry. So in the bargain, you had the same amount of money being spent, which could have done much better. Ministry of Railways and Ministry of Defense also needs a lot of coordination, because the forward area, the border states definitely need to be connected by railways, not only for the defense part, but that is a national right, the citizens' right to be connected right up to the border, the far-flung areas. That was something again which was not being considered properly. Between the Ministry of Railways and the Ministry of Road Transport, you could have had a single multi-purpose tunnel. You could have had a single bridge which would have been used for the dual use, but that was not thought of. You had different alignments, so you went in sinking money for a rail bridge and for a road bridge and for a rail tunnel and a road tunnel. You look at the kind of amount that we would have wasted all these years. You have the Ministry of Defense with the Indian Navy looking at deep sea mining, Ministry of Earth Sciences also doing the same. To do the exploration, you need unmanned autonomous vessels, which together it can be done at a lower price, at a better time frame. So how do we look at these various ministries of water, environment? I'll give you an example of the environment. Along the China border, you need roads to carry your tanks and your guns. And somebody puts a public interest litigation and says that the road is going to damage the environment, so the road should not be wider than 5 meters. Or not wider than 5 meters, your tanks and guns don't go. And they went to the Supreme Court. So finally, again, long drawn litigation process, finally, the Supreme Court understood. What does it result in? It results in wastage of time and cost escalation, because the inflation doesn't stop for you. It doesn't stop because there is a case pending in the Supreme Court. So that part also, finally, you get it, but at a later time frame, and then it requires time to do. So what did the government do? The government re-energized the National Security Council and the National Security Council Secretariat. What do? They do not replicate any ministry. They bridge the interministerial gaps. They bring comfort to those ministries which are not able to explain their stand, and they view it from both the economy as well as the security, and they ensure that the best possible result is given to the country. The research and development which is being done by Ministry of Science and Technology, Ministry of Space, it's required by Ministry of Defense. There are satellites which are being launched. There are satellites which have to be launched. The designing and making of satellites, nano satellites, micro satellites in different orbits, whether it's a polar orbit, whether it's an inclined orbit, different resolutions that have to be brought in. Who's going to prepare this hardware? Who's going to prepare the payload which has more software? Who's going to look at the sensors? Somebody has to sit together and bring it together. So that is the kind of job. So when you say institutional designing, this is the institutional design which was brought in, and in a very cordial atmosphere, this kind of bridging of gap and reducing the pain points in the journey ahead has been done. Internally, what is being done? The three services are being integrated to a level, and that was the job which General Rawat was doing, and his successor will continue to do. The kind of intelligence gathering, there are intelligence agencies in the civil sector. When I say civil sector, I'm meaning the government civil sector, and in the services sector, that is in the military domain, they are also being brought together. Their resources are also being optimized. The entire national resources which are meant otherwise for every compartment are being monetized in a manner that no resource should be lying unutilized and in the bargain causing a major national loss. And this calculation of major national loss should have been the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance all this while and the various audit and account sections in every ministry. But sadly, this was left out and only emphasis was on bookkeeping. I think I will stop here and take on more questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You've touched upon a very important aspect of institution building and capacity building, and that's the public-private partnership. That's, I think, is extremely critical to this entire edifice of, working on the grand strategy through the process of institutions. With that, I would now open the floor for questions. Kindly raise your hands if you have any questions. And in the meantime, I would like Ambassador Mohan to kindly quickly discuss India's grand strategy. And because Professor Sumit Ganguly has extensively said about the role of grand strategy, and especially in the wake of how US has used that to build its aura, and how, especially in the Cold War era, that's been very instrumental. I would like you, Ambassador, if you can throw some light on India's grand strategy and how that has worked about over the last 70 years. So you're muted. Sir, you're muted.
Thank you, Aayushi. I don't think we should cut off people for questions, so I'll take just 1 minute since I was the first speaker. I find myself in large agreement with both my eminent co-panelists. On the grand strategy and the whole of government approach, which was explained so lucidly by Professor Ganguly, I completely agree with him. I just wish to make one point. The grand strategy has to focus only on one issue. India today houses 400 million people, at least on a conservative estimate, who live in abject poverty. You cannot become a great power, a big power, with 400 million people living in abject poverty. You may have the best defense forces, the best equipment, the best diplomats. It doesn't mean anything to me, frankly, because ultimately the grand strategy has to focus on this. And that is why I go back to my original point. We have to find a way to lift these people out of poverty as quickly as possible. We have taken way too long. For those of the students, etc., I see a lot of young people. The Niti Aayog's multi-dimensional index of poverty is a good measure. Take a look at it. I think this is the first time the Niti Aayog has modeled itself on the Oxford multi-dimensional index of poverty. And of course, the Niti Aayog's estimate is different from mine. They say about 250 million. My estimate ballpark is 400 million, frankly. And so I think this is what the grand strategy has to focus in the first instance. Of course, there are lots of other objectives, but I thought I should make this point. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's a very important point, because inclusivity is critical to this, to building, to nation building. Thank you so much. We have a question from Manish. Yes, Manishji.
Thank you, Professor Aayushi. Questions for both Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Obviously, as very always very. In fact, I was just messaging him. Extremely brilliant and passionate whenever he speaks on issues, and these are some of them are very dear to his heart. I know that. So what do you see? How do you see these some recent changes in the MEA creating a Indo-Pacific division or change at the level of secretaries, additional secretaries, and especially focus on economic diplomacy? So how do you see that? That's the question for Ambassador Kumar. And for Lieutenant General Khandare Saab, there has always been this discussion about having an independent national security cadre. So what sort of debate is happening on that? What sort of progress, what sort of ideas are being discussed on that front, sir? Thank you.
So thank you very much. If I can just answer the first question, Manishji, with your permission, and Aayushi. Look, I frankly think that we are fortunate to have a minister who understands the ministry well. Otherwise, so much time would be spent by the secretaries and others in in enlightening the minister, educating the minister, getting instructions. I don't mean any disrespect. We've got wonderful people in the past as foreign ministers. So please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But I think it's wonderful to have the current foreign minister. Having said that, I think some of the division of work that has happened in the secretaries is welcome, because there was an earlier criticism that the foreign secretary is the first among equals. But in 2012-13, there was criticism that all the important work was being done by the foreign secretary. The other secretaries had only lighter tasks to perform. I think that has now been rectified largely. There are very important charges now for even the other secretaries. So there is a better balance. But frankly, Manishji, the problem is we'll have to wait for 4 or 5 years to get more joint secretaries, because right now we have enough people at the secretary level. We have enough people at the undersecretary level. But as you know, the government of India's the functioning of the government of India is based on joint secretary level. The joint secretary is a very critical level. There we lack people. I think in another 3 or 4 years, we should have enough people. So that's my limited answer to your question. Thank you.
Manish, regarding the issue of national security cadre, my personal views on this are any change or any new creation should be need-based. And if we have to identify what are the weaknesses today, and to overcome those weaknesses, do you need to create something new, or you need to address whatever is the weakness in the current structure? So let's see, where are we lacking? Very small examples. If you look at the user and the person who's providing the service, say the intelligence is required from the NTRO or the Intelligence Bureau or the RNAW, and that is being provided to the armed forces or to the police services, the Central Armed Police Forces, as well as to the state police. By creating a new structure, would this problem be overcome? Or we say, look, we need to modernize the intelligence agencies to a level where the technological intelligence, the technical intelligence capabilities are increased, the analysis assessments are improved, and then passing of this information is done so fast that nobody is left behind, and the action is taken even before the crime or the anti-national activity takes place. So I just give you an example that while we can create new structures, but is that going to address the problem? May not be. The other example which I want to give you is related to how does it happen today? You must have some amount of redundancy, but you cannot have duplication. Every time you have enough of duplication, you realize that it is the precious amount of money that is going down the drain. Same is the case when you have a national security organization or a cadre. Do we look at all other organizations being merged into this? Should we do so based on merit? Of course, it will take a number of years, possibly number of decades for this to stabilize. You look at all the new organizations that we've been creating. I'll give you a small example of the headquarter integrated defense staff. It came up in 2002. It's going to be nearly 20 years. What was missing? The CDS was not appointed. So you went in for piecemeal change. And in the bargain, you did not achieve what the IDS was expected to achieve. And now, while there is momentum in this, the direction is also there. So our kind of tinkering has to be with a need-based. Otherwise, I think giving names to all these organizations or creating new structures are not going to yield result. So that is my take on that.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And just if you can have a 30-second rejoinder, Professor Ganguly, on the role of institutions in the new Cold War between US and China. And I'm asking this question precisely with the background of the importance of having a rule-based world order. So how do you think this whole thing will pan out? So you'll have to unmute yourself. You'll have to unmute yourself.
My apologies. I didn't realize I was muted. What we are witnessing now under President Biden is a restoration of American institutions and a reliance on institutional channels to carry out foreign and security policy rather than a foreign and security policy which was almost completely personality dependent and a disregard for institutional channels, and also a disregard for multilateral institutions, a disregard for a global rules-based order. I think there are real attempts to restore both at home and abroad a respect for institutions and a respect for the rule of law. Is this perfect? By no means. There will be flaws, there will be shortcomings, there will be limitations. But we are seeing a concerted attempt to once again follow certain routinized procedures, certain institutional channels for the conduct of foreign and security policy, and an emphasis on the importance of multilateral institutions in the global order, a certain respect for international law and international organizations, all of which, in my judgment, were shredded by the previous administration. Now, the question, of course, remains what happens at the end of 4 years, and much that really depends on the vagaries of American domestic politics, because that will determine the next presidency. But certainly, for the duration of the current president's term, we are witnessing a return to certain institutional procedures, a respect for institutional procedures, both at home and abroad.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. With that very insightful and engaging deliberation over the last 1 hour, thank you so much to all the speakers for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. And thank you to the audience for being there. With that, I end this session. Thank you once again. And over to you. The virtual floor is yours, Dr. Manish. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aayushi ji, for really shepherding this session. So, and thanks to all the distinguished speakers who have really enlightened us with their wisdom. And I'm sure there have been very serious ideas which have been brought out brilliantly by each one of them, which have really added to our understanding of how institutional design and institutional reforms are being seen, and especially all of them have been really very deep insiders in many ways. So thanks to each one of you. And with this, I now now move to the next session, and we have with us Shri Panjan Chaudhary, who is in fact one of India's top diplomatic reporters, diplomatic correspondents, and he is now the diplomatic affairs editor of the Economic Times. So over to you, Dipanjan.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Manish. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to moderate this session. I know it's been, I couldn't be part of all the sessions, but it's been in very interesting 2 days. I can understand from the tweets and very interesting thoughts which have come across. And I saw the points that was in the last session also. So the India Futures, in my opinion, has been doing a great job in the last couple of years, and during particularly in 2 years, to keep the discourse of global politics and geopolitics going from an Indian viewpoint, despite all these challenges. And to discuss international perspectives today, we are joined by Ambassador Navdeep Suri, of whom I have known for many years. So, I mean, we go back when you were Joint Secretary Public Diplomacy and all those sessions when you brought a lot of the congressmen, not only from the US, and I remember the permanent representatives of various countries that you brought at one point of time and also I know you really set the tone for public diplomacy at that point of time. Before moving on to Egypt, and then to two interesting postings. I mean, one Australia, one part of the world, and then to UAE. And interestingly, with both, our relations have been transformed, and you have been part of it. You have contributed to it in a big way in the last decade, I would say. We have also with us High Commissioner Simon Wong. He's been a great friend of India. Great. I have the pleasure of interacting with him on a host of issues, not only on Singapore but across on Indo-Pacific. His knowledge is immense, from the South China Sea region to the Straits of Taiwan, if I may say. And we have one of our very active diplomats of the city, Ambassador of Denmark. Welcome, Ambassador Freddy. I mean, this is your second stint in India, and you have done 2 stints in Japan and 2 stints in India, which show that you have a special love for us. I mean, for India and for Indians, and want to, I mean, give a new momentum to the Indo-Europe relationship. And we saw how you were instrumental in bringing the Prime Minister of Denmark to here, which was the first head of the government visit since the pandemic to India. I mean, so you were, in a way, set the ball rolling for major incoming visits to India. I would like to begin with Ambassador Suri. Ambassador, you have been handling a lot of, it's not just public diplomacy, but also energy issues. You have been our envoy in 2 countries which have huge energy resources. One of them, of course, is a big player in the energy market, another which has huge gas reserves. So how do you see India's energy needs being met by these 2 countries in the coming decade or 2 decades, or I would say in the next 30 years, between 2030 to 2050, both in the traditional as well as in the non-traditional fields?
Well, Panjan, firstly, thank you for your very kind introduction. Good to be back in conversation with you. Look, on the energies front, there is no question that the Gulf countries, broadly speaking, will continue to provide a very large percentage of our petroleum and diesel and aviation fuel and natural gas and all of that in terms of crude oil and gas. In fact, I think around 60% of our requirements continues to come from the Gulf. We've tried over the last few years to change the nature of our energy partnership with the Gulf. There was a time till about 6 or 7 years back when it was fairly straightforward. We were large buyers and they were large sellers. I think what we've been able to do through sustained diplomatic effort over the last few years is change it into a more meaningful, more broad-based energy partnership. And what I mean by that is when you look at the establishment of our first 2 strategic petroleum reserves in Bangalore and in Padur, those happened in partnership with the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. When you look at ONGC Videsh, which was looking at energy resources or equity oil from Venezuela all the way to Vladivostok, it was a glaring omission that we didn't have a footprint in the Gulf. So we got our first oil concessions in UAE and then subsequently in Oman, both onshore and offshore. And from the lower Zakum Basin, we've actually been receiving oil from day one. When you look at the very ambitious refinery project that we had signed the MOU for, but which got caught up in Maharashtra politics, unfortunately, at Ratnagiri. That was going to be a $50 billion investment, the largest greenfield refining project of its kind, with 50% of the equity coming from ADNOC and Saudi Aramco. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the days when we were simply buying oil wasn't the case. We still buy oil, but the relationship has been transforming. In addition to that, I think there's a second dimension, which is the investment dimension. And UAE in particular has been a major investor into 2 of our largest renewable energy companies, Greenco and Renew. And have a lot of appetite to promote green energy. And if green hydrogen is going to be the fuel of the future, then again, we're going to look at some very strategic areas of partnership with them. So to the extent that energy is a key part of our equation, I think it's going to stay that way for many years to come.
Ambassador Freddy, if I could take from what Ambassador Suri said, this transition, and Denmark is playing a key role in transition from fossil fuel to the green energy, and that's and the only country that has signed a green strategic partnership with India is Denmark. How do you foresee Denmark's role in this, and what do you see the future of India in the clean tech and the climate financing, after COP26, because there have been a lot of, misgivings about, I would say unnecessary misgivings about India's position in this.
Thank you very much indeed, and good to be with good colleagues and friends. I think it's a very pertinent question that you're asking. We all know that India, with its 1.3, soon 1.4 billion big population, you need to grow. The electricity consumed per capita in India is very, very low. It's 1/3 of the global average. So it goes without saying that you have to really build up your energy security, but you also have to build up your energy infrastructure. Through our Green Strategic Partnership, I think we are operating with 5 S's. Most of these S's have been formulated by your Honorable Prime Minister Modi ji. And the first one is scale. India has the scale, both when it comes to opportunities, but also challenges. Secondly, Prime Minister Modi has mentioned many times that he would like to have the skills from Denmark. We also think that India has a lot of skills, but leave that aside. That means solutions or technical solutions, technologies, and so forth. So we'd like to transfer that so India can grow that part of its energy mix as per the requirements, but also as per the decision of India herself. The third S is scope, because what we are doing is not just about India and Denmark, it goes well beyond that. Then the fourth S is related to speed. I mean, we all know that the climate changes are really prominent and devastating to some extent. We see the changes every day, also here in India. So we have to really to focus on how to bring these technologies and how we can let's say, reduce the negative impact on the climate changes. And then last time when our Prime Minister was here, your Prime Minister added sustainability. I think it's important. Climate changes is not an issue that knows borders. It's something that we all have to deal with. What is important for us, we are in no way telling India what to do. I mean, we come with our skills and there's a kind of catalog. And we say to our friends here in India, you can do whatever you like, but we'd like you to move towards a greener and more sustainable direction. And I think that's the way forward. Coming to the results of COP26, I think many, despite whatever has been said, many will agree to the fact that Prime Minister Modi took a very, very ambitious kind of step in Glasgow, announcing really, really hardcore commitments that is not easy even for a growing economy like India. So it's really ambitious step. There are 2 aspects here that we have to solve globally. Of course, financing. You can't expect India just to finance these things out of its own pockets. It's impossible. So therefore, we need the green finances. And in fact, the COP15 that took place in Copenhagen came with a very strong commitment on $100 billion to be transferred to the developing countries. We never came to that, and I feel that's a pity. Denmark has, in its last finance bill, set aside money, so we will take 1% of the 100 billion from this year and onwards. That's a clear commitment, and we hope that others will follow that. The other part is technology, and we need to secure that the best technology, the best available technology and technologies can be transferred to India. And therefore, we are using our Green Strategic Partnership to help India looking into what we can offer from our side, whether it's green hydrogen, offshore wind, smart grids, and whatever and whatnot. We stand ready. So we have a catalog, so it's for India really to pick and choose. And how it's done, it's up to your side, but we are ready.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for elaborating on the path that India could take with support from Denmark. High Commissioner Wong, Singapore has been India's primary partner in the ASEAN, in Southeast Asia. Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew had once mentioned, India as one of the wings that Singapore wants to fly. In one wing is China and one wing in India. In the, changing geopolitics, what role can Singapore play in pushing India's role in this part of your part of the Indo-Pacific? I would say, in what is east of India to Indo-Pacific, because Singapore is also the country coordinator for ASEAN, for India in ASEAN for their next 3 years. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Too engrossed in my co-panelist discussion. Very good evening to all my co-panelists and people listening in, and also good morning to our viewers overseas. Thank you very much, Panjan, for giving me that question. I think as a small country, our founding fathers have always believed in maximizing the choice that are given to Singapore, and also making opportunities for ourselves in choosing our own destiny. There was a period in time after the Cold War, I would place it perhaps between 1989 to 2008, before the financial crisis, whereby the global order is theoretically or in fact unipolar, and because of that, there was an explosion of opportunities across Asia and in the building of many economic engines. Our leaders then felt that aside from the Western world, it is time for Asia to also turbocharge ahead. And we have identified several engines of growth, India being one of the key engines, China being the other, ASEAN in a smaller capacity, and also the existing 4 dragons. So very early on in engaging India, I would say the beginning of the mini Indian heat wave from Singapore is in 1992, when India itself pushed forth a very ambitious economic reform policy. And since then, from 1995, when our first investments came to India, we are now at the ballpark of cumulatively about 70 billion US dollars. This is quite in the same level as what we have put in our neighborhood ASEAN, and in perhaps maybe 10 or 20 billion dollars short of what we have put in China. So the idea of having India as a key engine of growth for the region, and also Singapore partaking in riding the wave of economic growth in India is very important to us. And coming back to your point, and how can we, Singapore, bring in India or encourage India to perhaps do more in ASEAN? India is already doing a lot as a dialogue partner and a strategic partner of ASEAN. I think come next year, it will be the 30th anniversary of Indian-ASEAN relations. And I think beyond India being an engine of growth, India now, because of geostrategic rivalry, has an added role to play as a choice maker for ASEAN countries. So if you look at both ways, how ASEAN countries view India and India views ASEAN, I think it's very, very critical that both sides come together on some common front. If I look at at it from a very strategic angle, you will see that out of that many ASEAN key partnerships that we have, those countries who put a lot of effort in engaging ASEAN tends to bear more fruits. Countries who are deliberately and very consciously deal with ASEAN-based issues and helping ASEAN countries, and we are a right range of countries, tend to yield much better fruits. I would say China is very, very deliberate. Japan is very, very deliberate. The Biden administration is very deliberate now. Australia, in a sense, is coming back online. So India, I would encourage India to not look at status quo, and in looking at new frontiers, areas which perhaps the bigger players around ASEAN is not looking at. Where are your strong points? Prior to our discussion, the previous session, we talk about capacity and we talk about how to rejig some of the organization. I think key to this point is, and we have a very, very enlightened EAM who knows the issue very well, is to really beef up the officers and the group and the team of officers dealing with ASEAN. I would say from a personal experience, in terms of headcount, it is not enough. Basically, you're having one officer cover several countries. And if you compare to other key ASEAN interlocutors, they have an army of people dealing with ASEAN issues. And ASEAN being a very convoluted and sometimes quite frustrating organization, because you have to deal with 10 people with disparate, 10 countries with disparate views, it takes a lot of time and effort. So you need to come in at the capacity level. Less that, then the ideas level, how do you come in? And I think many good ideas have come up. I would say how to link up India and ASEAN in the e-stack space, meaning your co-payment scheme, your efficiency in terms of tech, how to move trade using internet means, AI means. This is one area that ASEAN countries need, and that's where the solutions come from. I think Indian solution makers are in abundance, and if that is made known and linked up with ASEAN, you will see an exponential growth in appreciation of that relationship. I think the traditional way of anchoring ASEAN through land or sea route is interesting ideas which MEA has already thought of. Designating the Northeast states as a conduit of engagement with their land cousins, ASEAN cousins, is through roads. I think is a good means of building that relationship on the land border side. On the sea side, I think security is a bright spot. Although there is no India ASEAN naval exercises yet, but India has been partnering with Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia on the maritime front, and I think that relationship is stronger and stronger. If you look at how some key ASEAN countries have reacted with sadness and surprise with the passing of the late General Warat, you can see that kinship built through the years of the military. So I'm not going to perhaps stop there, but there are a lot of food for thought in India engaging ASEAN. And on the reverse side, I think ASEAN should relook some of their relationship with India too. Sometimes if you are a keen watcher of India, you should perhaps not hear what our previous panelists have been talking about, internet chatter, Twitter chatter, or some politicians coming up to say certain things. The long-term trend is a very, very positive trend, and I think I urge our ASEAN colleagues to see beyond the Twitter headline. Thank you.
Ambassador Freddy, if I could take our audience to Europe now. I mean, from ASEAN, Europe is emerging as a pillar of support to India, and is a key pillar in geopolitics. I mean, one of India's. I mean, we are not just looking at US as a partner, but Europe as a key partner. And Denmark has been a member of the European Union for many years. You have been working with India for many years. This is your second stint, right? So I have two, very sharp and one. Why do you see the future of India-EU relations, and India-EU-India-Europe relations? And two, how do you see the European investments in India in terms of the ease of doing business?
Very, very good questions. The first one, I think India has reached out to Europe much more than they used to do, and we appreciate that. And finally, India also came to the conclusion that Europe is well beyond a few bigger countries like UK. Now UK is out, but anyhow, Germany and Italy and Spain to some extent. And so I think India has realized that smaller countries like mine is also of importance for India. So when India has decided to reach out, I see that's a kind of counterbalancing what's happening geopolitically, but also geoeconomically, because these two things are really interconnected. I see Europe as an entity without any hidden agenda geopolitically. We want really to promote democracy, the same rules, multilateralism, freedom of navigation. So I think there is a level of common positions and common understandings between Europe as such and India. Of course, we like to see the free trade agreement in place. That's important for India, it's important for Europe, and I think that will also be part of kind of anchoring the stability which we need globally and so forth. So I see only good perspectives for that cooperation in the future. When it comes to your second question, Dipanjan, I must say we have many companies who are from Denmark, but also Europe at large. They are ready to invest. They are investing heavily. The ease of doing business is not what it should be, but I've seen very, very clear, let's say, ameliorations and betterment. And when I left India back in 2015, going back to Japan and came back to India in 2019, I could see three major important changes. You might not detect them if you live here on a kind of daily basis.
Øjeblik. Hvem vil du sende den til?
Sorry, somebody is interfering here. The first was the level of self-confidence had increased drastically at all levels. The second part, digitization, and that was also part of the, let's say, the combat against the pandemic and so forth. And thirdly, which our very prominent Indian foreign minister or minister for external affairs has called the Indian way. I think India has really defined its own way, and that way will also help India becoming an accelerator, not only for economic growth, but also for stability and a different world order where these common values will have a huge impact. So I see a bright future for India, and India is quite good navigating in geopolitics. You have good relations with US, you had good relations with Trump, now with Biden, you had Putin coming here last week or whenever it was, and you have Europe and so forth. So I think India has really scaled up its skills when it comes to navigate in a very complex and very difficult and sometimes challenging geopolitical situation.
Ambassador Suri, I mean, this bringing to navigating, you have in your 4-decade-long career have done this well, and who knows better than Indian diplomats and a senior diplomat, like how to navigate. So, and we have seen emergence of new quad, where UAE is playing a very important role. And I understand it was Israel and UAE who had initiated the idea. India joined, and US had sort of, had a blessing to all of them. What do you see would be the goal of this in the coming, say, next 5 years or a decade? A, and how do we balance this with rest of our relations in that region between Iran to Egypt?
I think the Panjan minilaterals really seem to be the flavor of the season. And we are seeing that, in the absence of multilateral institutions doing what they're supposed to do, like-minded countries are getting together to at least on areas where there's strong convergence of views and seeing how they can at least get moving with their agendas. This is, as you know, the second important quad that India and the US both are members of. And I think that itself is significant, that you have the US, India, Japan, Australia quad, and now you have the emergence, I would say, of one, which is US, India, UAE, and Israel. I think, part of this stems from the change that's taking place in the region itself. The Abraham Accords were probably one big foreign policy success under President Trump that has shown that the Middle East can be reimagined differently. And the fact that relations between Israel and UAE have progressed so dramatically in the last year and a half or less, in fact, that they've been around, means that it creates new opportunities for others in the region. And one of those opportunities is this new arrangement that has come up. UAE, as you correctly mentioned, not only is playing a role, but is in a position to act as a real bridge. It's almost equidistant between India and Israel, isn't it? So if you look at Mumbai at one end and Haifa at the other end, then UAE quite sits right in the middle. There are areas in which trilateral cooperation is already beginning to take off between India, Israel, and UAE. There's an Indo-Israeli International Chamber of Commerce, which has its headquarters in Dubai. It came out of nowhere, but the Israelis see the potential offered by the fact that there's already a $60 billion trade between India and UAE, and you've got this 3.5 million strong Indian diaspora in the UAE, including some very large businesses, including some very large financial institutions, and so it's kind of a role as a potential bridge is there to be seen. Right now, it's a bit like an elephant. Each country sees it differently. So if you look at it from a US perspective, it perhaps sees it yet another hedge against Chinese dominance. If you look at it from an Israeli perspective, it looks at it probably as another point against Iran. For India, the point that you made earlier, the challenges to maintain this new relationship now without sacrificing the very close relationship that we've traditionally enjoyed with Iran. But I think our diplomacy over the last decade, as Ambassador Wong was also mentioning, has been quite adept at walking the tightrope, at making sure that we don't get into a position of a binary either or. That we can walk and chew gum at the same time, to misappropriate a famous phrase, to say that we can be friends with Saudi Arabia, we can be friends with Iran. We can be friends with UAE and Israel and Egypt without necessarily putting ourselves in that awkward situation. And I think countries in the region are beginning to understand it. I think there's a recognition that a large, stable India in a volatile part of the world from where you're beginning to see some form of a US retrenchment is going to be looking for regional powers that are net contributors to security. And in their eyes, India fits that bill in a way that very few other countries in the region can. And I think that's where we, after years, Master Wong was speaking about the ASEAN factor. But, he should take comfort that we started a look east policy much before we started a look west policy. And the Act East came much before we got down to the Act West policy. So now that we've got our act together on both flanks, I think India is really reclaiming some of the geopolitical space that it had traditionally occupied in terms of its eastern and western flanks. We've started to reimagine our security, not just on the basis of our land borders, but in a larger sense, across the Arabian Sea and across the Bay of Bengal as well. And I think that's where some of these developments that you spoke about can be seen.
Thank you, Ams. So, High Commissioner Wong, a quick comment before I open it to the audience is: do you envisage any such minilateral, plurilateral in Southeast Asia involving India? We know of India-Singapore Thailand naval exercise, which has done its third edition, right? But can this be replicated? What has been done in West Asia, and which can manage the a regional security architecture in a way, or a mini keeping ASEAN centrally? Is this possible, or this is asking for too much?
Yeah, I mean, from a personal level, I think having mini laterals are really quite an inventive way of dealing with specific issues. I think sometimes bigger organizations tend to be weighed down by bureaucracy and sometimes weighed down by procedures. So perhaps the meetings of mind on a certain topic, it is a useful way of dealing with issues of the day. And I think if you look at original Quad, how it was formed and how quickly they brought in agenda items, I think it is a good move in that sense. So I see perhaps in the Indian eye or even in the US eye, a way of dealing with a very, very complicated world. But I want to add a caveat, as you rightly pointed out, Panjan, to say that in the case of Singapore and also in the case of many Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN centrality is not just a buzzword. It means we have to do things in line with what is agreed upon in ASEAN. So we can do a minilateral based on what we have agreed upon in ASEAN, meaning we can't say one thing in ASEAN and then have a sideline discussion on something that is kind of in the gray area. So I think that's one key important point. And the second point, which I think Ambassador Suri has very astutely pointed out, is that different people or different configuration of countries see the idea of setting this multilateral very, very differently. So it may have a bigger country in mind because of constant competition, and other partners see it in a very, very different way as a balancing act. So depending on how you see it, I think we're open to it, but we want to see in which area that we want to deal with in order to come together in a smaller group. I've dealt with the issue of North Korea for a long time. If you dial back 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when you have the six-party talk, and there was an early success in six-party talk, during that time, our US colleague declared that six is the correct number, and that any coming together of six-party will get the job done, rather than going through perhaps the ASEAN process or going through a larger process. But if you look at it from a historical point of view, where is the six-party at? So I'm not throwing cold water, but I'm saying you need a very specific landing zone in order for you to come together. So in original Quad, I think they have kind of done a good job in coming together in a compromise way. And I think what needs to be done is that after you have all the agenda items, you deliver it, because everybody is watching you. Thank you.
Thank you. I see few hands raised. I would go by Professor Ketkar, then Mr. Krish, and then I see somebody by the name of Stephen. I can't see him. Professor Ketkar, you had something?
Yes, thank you so much, sir. It's very interesting, Ambassador Wong, you've mentioned a meeting of minds. So while that is important and a great starting point, I would like your comments on a more concrete issue, and that is having common concerns. And this is very important for countries like India, Singapore, and a lot of Southeast Asian countries, including Vietnam, who have a very aspirational population. So they have to strike a balance between common concerns of the world like climate change, as well as taking care of this young population which is seeking growth. So how do you see, probably, you can share your Singapore experiences, because India is now having to do that tightrope walk where development and at the same time, a principled perspective on things like climate change, that is becoming a very challenging issue. As you recently have seen how countries have, kind of commented on India and the usage of coal here. So somewhere, I think striking that balance is important, and we would like to hear your experience in this regard. Thank you so much.
Professor Ketkar, I fully agree with you. So striking that balance is always very painful, especially for ruling parties who has successfully win elections for a long time. So it's always at the back of their mind to say that the issues of youth and the issues of employment, is it going to be a big political issue? And what are the principles behind your thinking which you can defend very rigorously so that your citizenry can come on board? If I answer your question, perhaps at the macro level, the tussle of the day between US and China right now is framed in a narrative of a challenge between systems. But if you look at it in its essence, it is actually a competition and challenge within the system. Who holds the right to what, and who has the biggest say in global supply chain? Who has the upper value chain? Who should not blink, and who should not use that advantage to squeeze other smaller nations or to do their bidding? So that in itself is a larger question. But if you look at it purely at the public level, at the grassroots level, people think about bread and butter issue, especially post-COVID. They understand that climate change is very, very important. They understand not having perhaps an even aggressive force around the region who pokes at you from time to time. It is a macro issue, but they want to know in this contestation, the government of the day, if you choose a certain path, will it impact on my pocket? Will it impact on my job? I think that is a more immediate impact post. I mean, during COVID time and perhaps post-COVID, they really people don't think that big. They just want who can invest, who can give me the money to start a very nice high-tech factory with good salary job. I would raise my hand to deal with it. But as a government, you need to balance all these things together. And as you look at the larger theme of our 2 days conference is the necessity for choice. Do we have that choice? So given that a small country like that, we need to build alternatives and build the choice. And therefore, India becomes so important to Singapore. We are the largest investor in India, occupying in the past 2 years 29% of total investments in India. Why are we putting so much money in it? Because we believe our future is in India, and we need to ride the wave of growth. But sometimes the rhetoric in Singapore, manipulated by perhaps some opposition viewpoints, they don't want that to happen. If you look at the recent Sika debate, and that the debate that you see COVID times, because of COVID times, Singaporeans are losing their jobs, and because of that, Singapore is using Sika to bring in even cheaper labor to replace me. That is the central thesis of a very fake argument, but it has salience. So how this interplays, as you rightly pointed out, is a fine line. But I think the government of the day in Singapore needs to take a very principled position and really argue the case in Parliament until they turn blue to hopefully change the views in public.
Professor Krishna, you had some queries. You have to unmute. You have to unmute.
Thank you very much. All the sessions have been fascinating, and I do not know whether these can be called as questions, because as students of foreign policy, I always had this doubt, and even when I want to collect research material, I encounter this problem. We have great material, great things about the look east policy of India, but when it comes to look west, we want to teach our students or collect material for our own research. I think hardly there is anything, but we know officially we had such policy of since 2005 or so. But I would like to know the take of Ambassador Navdeep Suri. Actually, is there a look west policy, complete look west policy, or should I say that it is very unfair that we have so much of energy, so much of time, so much of planning on look east policy, whereas for look west policy somehow that is lacking. My question to Ambassador Denmark is, since somewhat he is representing European Union, how does European Union take into account the competition between China and India? And does European Union has anything to formulate its policy basing on the competition between India and China?
Would you like to go first?
Ambassador, yeah, Mr. Suri, you can go. Yeah.
Okay.
Then Ambassador.
All right. Professor, on the articulation of the Look West policy, I was at this Indian Ocean conference in Abu Dhabi last week, and a couple of people were saying maybe I should write a book about it, right? From a practitioner's perspective, and I said, and I was saying it's much too early for that, and maybe some of the stuff is much too hot and sensitive to be written about already. But maybe with the benefit of some distance of time and space between it. But look at what you're saying. if there was a rationale needed, right? We have 9 million Indians in the Gulf. We have $100 billion of trade. 60% of our energy resources. Significant investments now coming in from Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, Mubadala, PIF, Qatar Investment Authority, etc. Shared interests in maritime security, which need no further explanation. The points of integration. To take an example, Minister Jaishankar has visited Abu Dhabi thrice in the last 2 months. The Prime Minister has visited Abu Dhabi thrice and is getting ready for a 4th visit. I don't know how many other countries he would have visited 4 times in the course of his 7 years. So clearly there is something going on, right? Are we making up for years of neglect? Perhaps. I mean, I always used to try and bring out this example that, for a country like UAE, which is such a large partner for us in so many ways, there was no prime ministerial visit from Mrs. Gandhi in 1981 to Prime Minister Modi in 2015 for 34 years. So are we making up for lost time now? The warmth is genuine. The areas of strategic cooperation are genuine. And I think one of the things that I, maybe would love to leave with you is, while we often take a lot of credit for having energized our policy towards the Gulf countries in particular, and within those particularly UAE and Saudi Arabia, I think there is also merit in looking at how those countries have changed and have started to view us differently. And I think for far too long, we had our blinkers that several of these countries are in the pro-Pakistan camp, and the Ummah is what brings them together. Yeah. Even as post 9/11 and particularly post the Arab Spring, these countries were changing their own positions with regard to radicalization, the role of religion in state and politics, and all of that. And in that reshaped equation, India was seen as a part of the solution and Pakistan was seen as a part of the problem. And we've seen that evolve over the years, right? How else would you explain an OIC Foreign Ministers Conference in Abu Dhabi inviting Mrs. Sushma Swaraj as the chief guest over Pakistani objections? Yes. I would simply urge respected academics like yourself to take a closer look at the changes that are underway now as opposed to what was the position 5 or 7 years back. And then perhaps see that we actually are not only looking west, but doing west also, a bit like what we did in the east. But to the extent that we need to articulate it better, perhaps you've got a point there.
Mr. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Very fascinating to hear about all these aspects. I think there's a necessity for choice also for India. And I think it can be condensed in the following way in general terms: or act east, act west, act strong. And that's what we are seeing. That's what we are liking. Strong India is the recipe for sustainable growth, for a stronger kind of stability economically and politically, and even security-wise. As to the very good question from Professor, Europe and China. The European Union has already last year formulated a very clear policy on China. There are 2 aspects. We see China as a rival, which is also the same that you are being faced with, but also a partner. I mean, economically, we've seen the success of China, and it's impossible. And I don't see anybody really trying to navigate around that. China is so important economically, and also in that context, it's important to uphold and strengthen these ties. It goes without saying. But on the other hand, we also have to acknowledge, which we have done on the European side and also on the Danish side, that China is also a rival, and we see a lot of challenges, perhaps growing challenges, and we have to deal with that in a multilateral context, and that's what we are doing. And if you don't have a sufficient kind of input to your discussion with your students, I think you should just call me, and then I'll come happily out and give the students a lecture about why India also needs to look west, but not on the, let's say, to compensate against act east. That would have to go hand in hand, and that will secure that India is acting strong and will be a strong player and a more predominant player in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Manish, you had a question?
Thanks, Dipanjan, and all three, I think, first-rate presentations. So I have a very quick, small question for High Commissioner Simon Wong. We have seen in the last many months or last couple of years, this whole suddenly Indo-Pacific is gathering steam. And if you look at various joint statements coming from Quad or even other, Indo-Pacific related issues, people are talking, decision makers are talking about ASEAN centrality. So, as a key member of ASEAN, how does Singapore see this whole notion of ASEAN centrality? Can you just sketch out what would mean in terms of its relationships with India, China, and the US? What do you, High Commissioner?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Manish, for the question. I think for us, for ASEAN, since we are country coordinator for ASEAN, what our vision of Indo-Pacific is to boil down to the point is that there should be no coalition against one country. And I think we want to be as neutral as we are. I think the oceans and the seas are connected in a way that every user has the right to use it, following the rules of engagement and the international rules. But at the same time, we don't want to be put in a situation where we are asked to pick sides, or we are asked to look at issues from a very binary point of view. In my opinion, I think we are looking at a situation whereby we don't see a great game competition between systems. If you look at it in a very, very logical and rational way, there are no, unlike the Cold War where you have to choose between one system, in a way the competition between US and China is not for smaller countries like us or even ASEAN collectively to choose one system. For us, I think, and we understand that there is a competition within the system. How we make the system better and make the system more rule-based is what we want. And I take a lot of flack because I'm a member of ASEAN and people think that ASEAN is very slow-moving. Your joint statements are very long-winded and it doesn't do much. But in essence, I think that ability to engage ASEAN in a way to use it as a stabilizing force, because if you are a strategic member of ASEAN, you need to sit down as a group to discuss things, and discussion is very, very important rather than shouting across the bar. I think if you follow the rules and regulations of ASEAN, there is a way to find compromise. Sometimes both sides doesn't like the compromise language, but there is a compromise. So it will buy time, I feel, in having cooler heads. ASEAN has survived President Trump's regime, and we are dealing with not an administration that does not trust its own bureaucracy. I think President Biden's return of using bureaucracy as a means to link up multilateral fora is very, very welcome, because you will have institutional memory rather than acting on a 3 a.m. tweet. So it is not a perfect way of doing things. But if what is the alternative? The alternative of not having ASEAN centrality is to break up ASEAN. If you break up ASEAN and you force countries to choose sides, countries on the bigger countries on the wish list may not get the country that they want, or they may be people who say, I want to abstain, I don't want to pick sides. And can you envisage a world between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea and the Malacca Straits if ASEAN is split into different camps? So that's the reason why key countries in ASEAN has been demanding that there should be ASEAN centrality, and we abide by what we agreed to within ASEAN. Of course, the situation in Myanmar has thrown a spanner in the work, because you have an internal situation that that we need to resolve very, very quickly, because ASEAN will be seen as a very toothless tiger if we can't get our act together. So again, there are a lot of challenges, Professor Manish. I cannot give you a perfect answer, but I can only say that without ASEAN centrality, the strategic shape of our region may be very, very, very different, and maybe even more contentious than right now.
Ambassador Freddy, Ambassador Suri, as we come close to this session, a final word from both of you. How you see India in the next decade from both of you?
Should I start? Thank you very much indeed. I think we'll see an India which is stronger than ever, playing a very important role economically, politically, and security policy-wise. No doubt about that. And also perhaps one of the strongest, if not the strongest, defender of a vibrant democracy. Took very kind note of Prime Minister Modi's participation in the Summit for Democracy. And the words that he spoke, I think they stand out, and they are signifying that India has realized that the necessity for choice is already here. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Dhanyavad.
Ambassador Suri.
Dipanjan, I'll take off from the earlier comment that we see an India which is more confident, which is more assured, more nimble, more pragmatic, less ideological in its orientations than it was at various points in the past. I would just keep my fingers crossed that our strength and confidence should not turn into aggressiveness or insecurity, which can have its own consequences both at home and for foreign policy. But certainly I see that foreign policy is an area where we have made very significant imprints over the last few years, and I'm fairly confident that we're going to continue on that path.
Thank you all for being part of this 1 hour session and for coming at a very, very short notice. All of you came on a very, very short notice. I know Ambassador Suri, Manish, Dr. Manish, and Ambassador of Denmark, you agreed on a Sunday, you agreed, and so was High Commissioner Wong. Now it's over to Shubhranshu for the final vote of thanks for bringing this beautiful conference to an end. Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you, Dipanjan sir. On behalf of the Indian Futures, I, Shubhranshu Pratim Sharma, would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the esteemed panelists for their enlightening remarks, to all the moderators for moderating these sessions so wonderfully, And to all the participants who have been with us for the last 2 days and made these 2 sessions enriching, we look forward to hosting you again in future. Please follow us on our social media handles, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at the Indian Futures. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.